All right, so you want to change the drinking context of how people consume alcohol in an on premise establishment. So, a bar, a nightclub, a restaurant. How do you do it? Well, there's three different types of interventions that can be done. So, there's establishment level interventions that focus on the restaurants and the bars, there's server level interventions, and then there's actually community level interventions. And we'll talk about each one of these in turn. So at the establishment level, these are interventions that really focus on making sure the establishments themselves comply with existing laws. So making sure that they're not serving people who are underage, making sure that they're not selling alcohol to people who already appear to be drunk and have the signs of intoxication. Um, Part of this is the use of dram shop liability laws. Now, these laws allow a person who is harmed by a drinker to sue the establishment who sold alcohol to that drinker. So if a bar serves someone who is drunk or serves them enough alcohol to get them drunk, that drinker who is now drunk goes out and drives, and that ends up in a car accident. And if someone else is injured in that car accident, that injured person can not only sue the drunk driver, but can sue the bar who sold him the alcohol to get him drunk. And by having these liability laws in place, it does actually increase compliance with existing laws, whether those are underage laws or laws prohibiting alcohol sales to drunk customers. These establishment level interventions are most effective when there's sufficient police enforcement involved. So when there are regular compliance checks, so someone else is looking over their shoulder, similar to restaurant inspections. So not just focusing on the health and safety aspect of the food, but actually determining whether they are actually complying and doing these checks for age. And it's also important to target repeat offenders. So if there has been establishment who got in trouble, so served alcohol to a minor or served a patron who is drunk, it's best to focus your efforts on them. Again, all resources are limited, to make sure they don't commit the same violation in the future. And really, you need these police enforcements. You need this enhanced enforcement, because once you stop doing it, any positive impact of these programs essentially disappear. Now, at the server level, what we're really talking about is responsible beverage service training, or RBS training. So through this training, you're trying to change attitudes of the servers towards underage and intoxicated patrons, increasing their knowledge and increasing their ability to not only recognize who the signs and symptoms of someone being intoxicated, but give them the skills to act on their training. So it's more than just education, it's actually a skill building opportunity. Now, the benefits are of this type of training is that it does actually build the skills. It increases their knowledge and attitudes about alcohol, at least the positive attitudes towards implementing these kind of anti-drunk policies, anti-drunk programs. It decreases their probability that they'll actually push additional drinks, so they won't ask if someone wants another drink as often as they would in the past. And we think that because that they're not pushing drinks quite as often, that it will lower the average BAC level, the blood alcohol concentration level, among people being served. But it's not, RBS training is not the magic bullet. It doesn't do everything well. One is because you really need buy-in from the establishment and the managers themselves. If a manager is telling you to push drinks hard because they can make a lot of money off them, you're, as a server, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to push back and say, no, I think we're harming our patrons, while also keeping your job. Like, there is some reality here that we have to work on. So unless the bar and the restaurant, the nightclub is behind you, RBS training isn't going to be very effective. And it doesn't necessarily decrease how likely someone's going to serve alcohol just based on how much they've already had to drink. It focuses on those signs and symptoms of drunkenness, but for dependent drinkers, there may not be any outward signs that are easily visible. when they're drunk. They may be able to hide it. They have a high tolerance. They can drink a lot and not show those signs and symptoms of drunkenness that someone who is not alcohol dependent wouldn't be able to do. So again, RBS training is not the magic bullet, but it is something that can work. Other trainings outside of RBS trainings that do seem to be helpful are ways to manage aggression and violence. So if someone is intoxicated and is essentially being violent towards other customers, ways to diffuse that situation. Because now this is very important because it's often hard to monitor consumption levels. So if you're at a bar and you're not sitting at the bar, and it's more of kind of a nightclub roaming around type of atmosphere rather than sit at the bar or sit at a table type of atmosphere, you don't know how much your patrons are consuming. You really don't, especially if they're closing out tabs every time they come up for a drink. They may come up to the bar, ask for a drink, walk away, come up again, and they may do this 3, 4, 5 times, and you have no idea who they are because there's so many people around. So you need these customer aggression trainings to try to diffuse situations when you can't actually prevent excessive alcohol consumption. And very similarly to the RBS trainings, they can increase knowledge, and when there's support from the managers and from the establishment, it can decrease physical aggression in these environments. Now, at the community level, these are programs where community members themselves are used to develop solutions to on-premise establishment problems. So what they're doing is they're trying to create programs that really pressure owners to take responsibility for their actions. They're trying to let them know that if these dram shop liability laws are in place and enforced, that they could be in trouble should something occur. An example of that is the STAD program in Sweden, where their community members using evidence-based research, evidence-based actions in an interdisciplinary way. So it's not just focused on addiction science, but using science from all areas as long as it can help them in their goal, to create programs and to advocate for programs that are thought to decrease alcohol consumption and decrease the consequences of alcohol consumption in these on-premise establishments. So some of the things they've done is developed RBS trainings to develop programs letting establishments know about dram shop liability laws in a way that's based on science, that's based on the evaluation study saying what is most effective and what is least effective. And I mentioned STAD in particular because it's been successful, because they've been able to expand from just a community program to really more of a countrywide program and having country-level impacts. Now, as with the server interventions, as with the establishment's interventions, community interventions will not be effective unless the community members themselves are engaged, unless the establishment's owners are engaged and actually support the program, and unless it goes on for a long time. Now, we might feel great if we can get a bunch of people together to talk about an issue, to write a report, and even to write recommendations. But if that only happens over a couple months or a couple years, then the long-term impact of that program is really nothing. Unless you're talking about 5 years, 10 years, multiple decades, you're not really going to see that population-wide impact. And really, when you run the evaluation studies, that's what's going to come out. You may see some short-term impact, but long-term, you're just going to return to the baseline values. Now, another community intervention, a more drastic community intervention, is actually changing the density of alcohol outlets in an area. In some areas, there can be a lot of bars in nightclubs and alcohol serving restaurants in very close areas. And what's important about this is that no matter where it has been studied in multiple countries throughout the world, as the density of alcohol outlets increase, so does alcohol consumption. Actually, so does the negative consequences of alcohol consumption. It's this amazing correlation which has been repeated multiple times in multiple different locations in multiple different populations. So by restricting the number of alcohol outlets in a given area, we can hope that we can reduce alcohol consumption, or at least keep it constant, make sure that it doesn't increase. And we can restrict the density of alcohol outlets through local zoning boards. Now, this would be a very tedious process, in all honesty, but because you have to go from one municipality to another municipality. But if they're successful, we can make sure that cities and towns can create zones where alcohol simply cannot be sold, and that it cannot be rezoned to specifically to allow these alcohol establishments, and that in areas of cities where alcohol is sold, we can cap the number of permits. So we can say only 5 bars can be in this neighborhood. Only 5 bars and nightclubs that sell alcohol can be in this neighborhood, and other places can open, but they simply can't serve alcohol. So this would be a very drastic thing, but it would also be a very effective thing if we could put it in place.